the fact that this Washington Post Ipsos poll shows a dead heat. 46% to 46%. Polls have been all over the place. A lot of the media polls have been bad. But this poll today will be one that Joe Biden will be holding up. Say, I'm tied. Show me. I've heard there's one poll that shows Kamala is. I'll tell you, I've seen a ton of polls. And neither Kamala nor Gavin Newsom nor any of the other Democrats are doing as well against Joe Biden, are doing against Donald Trump as Joe Biden is. I am not making the argument that he stays in the race or goes. I'm just saying, here's an example of why there's a great divide. Democrats who want him out will say, 2 out of 3 Americans, Mr. President, say you are too old to serve. You cannot win. And then Joe Biden will come back with the same poll saying, yeah, and I'm tied with Donald Trump. Tied with Donald Trump, even after the worst performance of my life. Explain that, Mike.
Well, yeah, I'll try. Joe and Mika, you both know Joe Biden very well. And you know, in Joe Biden's mind, there's a huge difference between someone trying to push him out and people seeking to give him the option of leaving on his own. That's why what you mentioned at the top of the hour, the possibility of a group of people who he respects, knows, admires, and even loves, Nancy Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, John Kerry, Chris Dodd, others like that, gathering with him and talking this out. Because it has to be talked out, because right now he's being cannibalized by his own party, by different rumors and by different various senators and Congress people saying, you know, it's time for him to leave. His problem is now one of reality and one of perception, both married together. The perception is, among a lot of people, since the debate, is that he's just too old to serve another term. And the problem politically is he has a strong base of support, oddly enough, among senior citizens, always had that support among senior citizens. Anybody 70, 75 years old or older is going to look at Joe Biden and think, knowing their own lives, saying, geez, it's possible he could die in office. That's a reality. And that's a reality that everyone has to deal with. He had a tough debate. He's talked about it. And Jonathan is correct. This afternoon at 5:30, that press conference is going to be vital to his survival as a candidate for the presidency. But before that, it's got to come down to a group of people who know and admire him, who he knows and admire him, people he trusts, sitting down in the White House and talking this through, rather than have this political death by cannibalization every single day.
You know, Willie, we learned many things from the debate. We learned that Joe Biden obviously had something go terribly wrong with him that night, and we still don't know what it was. And as I've said before, for those carnival barkers that are screaming about a media cover-up, you find the person that saw Joe Biden like that, and bring him on our show. We'll be glad to interview him, because I never saw anything that looked like that. But it was horrifying that night. I say that to also say that in even the New York Times Siena poll, even after that horrific display, Joe Biden picked up independent voters. Even after a divided and desolate Democratic Party, torn at the seams, while the Trump campaign is talking about a landslide now. They are planning for a landslide. We have a Washington Post Ipsos poll coming out this morning that says 2/3 of Americans consider Joe Biden too old to be president, and yet he is tied with Donald Trump, which, of course, is an argument for both sides. Joe Biden can say, I'm tied with Donald Trump. Right. The other side can say, yes, you're tied with Donald Trump, despite the fact you couldn't complete a sentence throughout an entire 90-minute debate. So let's get somebody in there who can, and just think how badly we will beat him. Again, that debate will go on. But one thing that can't be debated is a majority of Americans despise Donald Trump and find the thought of him being in the White House absolutely impossible to square with their vision of what a president should be.
That's exactly right. And that's what I mean when I say these are two sides of good faith within the Democratic Party who want one thing, to make sure that Donald Trump does not return to the White House. And they have two different views about the best ways to prevent that from happening. Some believe it's to stay with Joe Biden. Others believe in the unknown. And they'd like to see a plan, I think, as part of the problem. OK, if Joe Biden steps aside, what's your plan? And we haven't heard a definitive plan other than handing it off to Vice President Kamala Harris, which, of course, makes the most sense. Others say open it up at the convention. But still no signs, Jackie Alemany, that the president is stepping aside. He sent that letter, could not have been more clear on Monday to congressional Democrats. I'm not going anywhere. He actually made many of the same points that Joe is saying this morning, which is the longer this goes on, the longer we fight this out in public, the more it helps Donald Trump. Let's get together. Let's fight this guy. Let's beat this guy. So what are you hearing on Capitol Hill right now? What we've heard is privately people are worried about Joe Biden. They're worried about his age. They may even think he needs to step aside, but they hesitate to say it publicly. Nancy Pelosi on this very show yesterday morning, of course, with some innuendo saying he needs to make a decision soon, talking about President Biden, to which the Biden campaign says he did make a decision. He sent that letter on Monday. He's staying in. So where is that Democratic caucus this morning?
Yeah, Willie, well, that letter clearly wasn't clear enough for people like former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who made big news, subtle news, but big news, and a significant reframing of the conversation on the show yesterday. And her interview really sent shockwaves through the halls of Congress, especially amongst Democratic aides and staffers who were all already on edge. You know, there was this feeling last week when members were at home and were really frustrated and felt like there was going to be some momentum coming back into Washington, D.C. to maybe have some influence and try to convince Biden to potentially at least be open to the discussion of stepping aside. That conversation quieted early in the week. Then yesterday, Pelosi sort of reopened the door there, and it looks like she's kind of paving the way for a potential exit ramp, or at least providing cover for members, for these frontliners, these vulnerable Democrats who are seeing the polling that we're all talking about, and perhaps, polling that we're not seeing, internal polling, that is showing some really damning results for them. As one House aide put it to me yesterday, a senior House aide, we have no path to take back the House if Biden remains at the top of the ticket. And I think that's why you're now seeing the former speaker speak out the way that she did, again, to try to reframe this conversation. She's an institutionalist. She's someone who lives and dies by the House. At the end of the day, that is her priority. Democrats need 4 seats to recapture the majority. There is a lot of, happy talk publicly about getting behind Biden and ultimately having Hakeem Jeffries be the Speaker of the House in a Democratic majority next year. But I think the writing's on the wall for an increasing amount of members that that's not going to happen if Biden stays at the top of the ticket. That one of the big problems, though, Willie, is exactly what you just referenced, the lack of a contingency plan. And I think that's why we're not seeing more members come forward right now. That is the sort of back half of this conversation that is troubling a lot of members. The lack of logistical prowess, a fear about some measures around ballot concerns in states. If Biden were to come off the ticket and needed to be replaced, could that actually logistically be done in a way, or would there have to be litigation, legal fights like we've seen in Ohio? And then the consensus around that candidate. A lot of donors, these members are hearing from donors that they want an open process, and they're not necessarily rallying behind Kamala Harris.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.